we've previously met, and we've had several conversations around our experiences, and kind of like you've shared best practice and views with me, which I greatly appreciate. And I think, some of those I've taken on board and use now on a day-to-day basis, and share those. But I'm not going to take so much of the time up today, because I think people are here to listen to you. And I will hand over to yourselves, Lauren and Lisa, to take us through the role of a product owner stroke product manager, because even I didn't know there was a difference.
Can you hear me? I'm having really bad network. Could people kill video if that's not too much to ask? Could we turn videos off just because of bandwidth? Thank you. Lisa, could you share the slide deck? Is that okay?
Yeah, bear with me 2 seconds. Can everyone see
laptop. Yeah, got it. Great. Sorry, everybody. My laptop and connection has been very temperamental today, so I'm really hoping that I don't cut out. But Lisa, if you wouldn't mind jumping in if that does happen, hopefully it won't. So hi, everybody. Thank you for the lovely introductions. My name's Lauren Toombs. I'm lead product manager at Methods, and I'm joined today by Lisa Birkett, who is also a product manager at Methods. If we just go next slide, please, and we can just talk a little bit about ourselves.
Oh, yep.
Great. Okay. Oh, so yeah, that's me. I have been in product management for the past 8 or 9 years. So I started off as a subject matter expert as part of our digital transformation programme when I was working for the Ministry of Justice. And then from that point on, got a little bit of a taste of product management and what it entailed. And ever since then, I have been within the discipline. And I've worked for many different government departments, including Ministry of Justice, as I've just mentioned, the Cabinet Office, Government Digital Services, Her Majesty's Land Registry, Department for Education, and more recently Homes England. So I've definitely been around the block in government a little bit, trying to develop digital services that meet user needs. So I'm really hoping I can share some of my experiences with you all today, and just give you a bit of a taste of what product management actually is. Lisa, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. So my name's Lisa. I'm newer to product management than Lauren. I joined Methods in July last year, I think it was. Previously, I'd worked for 15 years with the National Lottery Community Fund, about 13 of those years in their programme and product development teams, sort of creating funding products and sort of working on project teams to kind of create and launch those. Kind of a role that evolved from a very, very waterfall approach to developing programmes to a much more agile methodology for sort of creating the products we were working on, and probably dipping my toes into a few different different roles, from service designer, bit business analysis, but kind of naturally sort of ended up more of a product owner for the programs we were working on. So yeah, that was kind of what brought me here to explore that role further. Right, shall I move to the next slide, Lauren, and we can...
Yes, please.
Crack on. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just going to take you through a couple of slides which hopefully describe what product management is. So the image that you can see on screen is quite a common image used across the industry to describe what a product manager is. So basically, we are the intersection between the business, technology, and user experience. And they always say that a good product manager must be experienced in at least one, but able to communicate and understand all of the different types of professions. So particularly stakeholder management with the business, making sure that you can have a basic understanding of technology and what your technical team are doing, and more importantly, understanding the user experience at the heart of everything. So the product manager basically defines the vision for the product or service and is ultimately the voice of the users. So pretty much, the voice of the users, whether that's external users or business users. Next slide, please. So product management is a well-known career profession. It is part of the digital data and technology profession within government. And there are various different roles of a product manager. So the starting entry level role is an associate. You've then got mid-weight product managers, senior product managers, lead product managers, and then you ultimately have a head of profession who is sort of responsible for the development of all product managers underneath them. The DDAP framework also sets out all the different skills required to be a product manager, which you can sort of benchmark yourself against. And there's different levels of skill that you can score yourself against. So awareness, practitioner, and expert. Ultimately, this framework should bring out development opportunities and opportunities for progression throughout the career. So if that is of interest to you, I would encourage you all to go and have a look at it. But yeah, that's how most government departments are sort of set up. And I think it's quite common across industry as well to have those different levels of roles. So I just wanted to talk through those. Next slide, please, Lisa. So the big question, so I noticed that the invite to this says that we are going to talk about product owners today. And, there is a slight difference between a product manager and a product owner. So I just thought I would set out an explanation to you all today. So it all depends on where you work and the language that is used in departments, whether you are in a product owner role or a product manager role. I've been both in my lifetime, but this description here is usually what the difference is between the two. So product managers are strategic, so they are responsible for setting the vision, setting the strategy, making sure that they align to the organisational objectives, make sure that they achieve the user needs, and also have a good understanding of the market that you're in. Product owners are a little bit more tactical, so they are in the development teams. If you all know what Scrum is, which is an agile way of working, they are in the Scrum team working with the developers to basically create the user stories, which is then going to create the product backlog, and they're sort of setting the direction for the teams. So that's basically the difference. You can be a product owner and still do things that product managers do, and you can still be a product manager and do things that product owners do. It's up to the organisations what role and language that they want to use. But across government, which I've already set out, we mainly use product management as the standard. Next slide, please.
There you go.
Thank you. Okay, so what is a product? So a product is a thing that creates value for a group of people by helping them to solve a problem or meet a specific need. So, we don't want to be in a scenario where we're creating products for the sake of it. You want to be finding a problem that's worth solving, and it's going to benefit a lot of people. It's going to bring a lot of value. And basically it will meet a need and their experience will be lots better afterwards, and there's a clear way that you can measure success afterwards. So again, a few examples here. Google search, for example, that addresses the challenge of finding information on the internet. Facebook provides people with the tangible benefit of allowing people to stay in touch with family and friends around the world. So there are a couple of really good products that we probably use on a day-to-day basis that have made our lives slightly better over time. Don't know what I'd do without Google, to be honest. And again, in government, in a government context, thinking about making it easier for our users to interact with government or public sector organisations such as councils, making it easier for them to interact and engage with us, because they don't want to do it because they want to do it. They're doing it usually because they have to. Okay. And just to, again, two more terms to set out. So the difference between a product and a service. So again, a product is tangible, whereas a service is intangible and can be made up of many products. So a lot of time, if you are delivering a single product on its own, the scope's usually quite defined. It's quite easy to achieve. If you're delivering an end-to-end service, that's usually made up of loads of different products or touch points that a user goes through. So, when you're delivering a service, you're probably thinking a lot more about dependencies, and there's probably different routes in, and it's probably going to take a little bit longer to achieve as well, rather than just delivering a single product. Next slide, please. Okay, and finally, what I just want to take you through before I hand over to Lisa, this is the service life cycle, which I think many of you may have heard across the council, and the different delivery phases that we go through when delivering digital services to meet user needs. So the discovery phase, which is all about understanding the problem, understanding the context and what we're trying to solve, identifying who our users are and what their needs are and what their pain points are. So discovery is all about basically discovering, says it in the title. We then go into an alpha phase, which is all about, once you've identified user needs and you've identified problems, it's about prototyping different types of solutions to solve those problems. So the alpha phase is very much around testing different concepts and either disproving or proving whether your solution is the right one to do. Then we go into a beta phase, which is basically when you actually go into development. So not so much prototyping anymore, although you will still be testing and validating with users, but this is your actual development of your actual service. So we talk about sometimes going through a private beta, whereby you develop something and share it with a small subset of users. And then we talk about a public beta, which is, you then open it up to all users to use the new service. So there's different phases within phases as well. And then we've got live, which is basically once we're happy that the service is meeting user needs. Again, we still don't stop iterating the service because we're still going to get feedback from users. We're still going to be learning, but we go more into a continuous improvement or business as usual phase, which is I guess more of a common term than live. So our work basically, we try and align to the GDS service standards, which is basically a framework, and we have to meet various different standards to be able to say that we have done a good job for each of these phases. So I've put a link on the slide. We're not going to go into too much detail today, but again, it's just a good checklist to measure your product or service against as you're going through the different phases, to make sure you're on track and to make sure you're covering off all of the different aspects. Okay.
That's a quick question, Lauren.
Yeah, of course.
Sorry,
I should have said that at the start. Feel free to raise your hands if you have got questions as we go.
Yeah, no worries. So I get this life cycle, and we've seen it a number of times, and totally buy into it for when we're developing stuff in-house. I'm intrigued with how that kind of product owner and product manager role fits when we're buying in kind of major products from third parties where we don't necessarily have the degree of control that you require to be able to kind of do that iterative development.
That's a really good question, Chris. And my response would be, agile is a framework, and sometimes ways of working don't always fit with the scenario. So again, I feel like product managers should be adaptable. If you're looking to buy in particular products to meet user needs. A lot of the time, the sort of discovering and making sure that you understand the needs and the requirements and you're solving a problem, that's all still going to be relevant. But as you say, the iterative development might not be as common in that scenario. So again, I think from in scenarios where I've worked through, build versus buy and that sort of thing, I'm still responsible for identifying the best solution, working with the team and making that call to make sure it meets user needs. But you're quite right, you're not necessarily going to go into that iterative development cycle. If you're buying something off the shelf that meets the need, then that's fine. So yeah, that's a really good thing to point out, actually, that there are some scenarios that this doesn't fit, and that's okay. We've just got to be adaptable, and we've got to just try and figure out what the best approach is for the problem and also for the organisation.
Sorry, I'm saying thank you to a muted mic there.
I think we've all been there. Anybody got any other questions at this point? Because I'm sharing my screen, I can't sort of see, but it's a point to pause if anyone's got any reflections before we kind of move on to the next bit.
Sorry, Laura and Lisa, there are some questions coming up in the chat, so I don't know if you want to pick them up at the end or do you want to pick them up as you go along?
If we pick the ones up in the chat at the end, that would be great, because I'm just keen to get through the slides, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yep, cool. Okay, I'm going to pick up here and just sort of go through some of the key things that a product manager might do, so some of the key tasks and some of sort of the day-to-day sort of things that we will do sort of when we're working with our teams. One of the sort of key things for a product manager is to set the product vision. So ultimately, the product vision should really kind of explain the motivation for the product, like the overall goal or thing that you're aiming for. It should sort of like encompass the reason for the product, the change that you anticipate it's going to achieve, and should be something really that inspires and guides the team and kind of like motivates them to kind of take things forward. Ideally, try and keep it something quite concise, something memorable. It should ideally be a single sentence, sort of focusing on the problem, focus on the problem rather than the solution, and sort of be able to something that we can kind of measure and sort of see the actual overall change. It should also be adaptable. I mean, things aren't going to be sort of set in stone, and things can evolve as you so I think particularly at the moment where I'm sort of working on an alpha, things are evolving on a daily basis, and kind of going back and sort of reviewing that vision and sort of refining it is a real sort of core thing of what we should be doing sort of with the wider team. We've got an example of a vision here, which is actually from Apple in 1980, and I think it's interesting because it is quite relevant now. To make a contribution to the world by making tools for the mind that advance humankind. That it's quite a big thing to kind of quite a bold statement to kind of put out there. But if you see what Apple's achieved over the last sort of 30 to 40 years, you can see, a vision can be bold and inspiring, and this is still something they could be sort of like aspiring towards today. The other thing that a product manager would look at doing is setting out like a roadmap. So you've got your vision, your motivation for the product, the thing that you're aiming to achieve. You also need to set out the steps in terms of how you're going to get there, and your purpose of your roadmap is to create that shared understanding, like where you're going, why you're like trying to get there. Your roadmap should really sort of focus on delivering value. Just get people excited about like the direction that you're headed in. Should provide sort of people across the organisation with an overview of like what you're intending to do and how it sort of fits into their wider strategic context. But in terms of a roadmap, it shouldn't be sort of over-promising. It doesn't have to go into quite a lot, a significant amount of detail. It's an overview. It's something that should sort of evolve and just give everyone like a good view of what's going to be happening sort of week by week, sort of month by month in terms of the product that you're working on. It should also be available and sort of shared widely, that it shouldn't be a secret, what it is that you're trying to achieve with the product. And, a key part of like making sure that stakeholders are understanding sort of what you're working on at the moment, what the plan is, where things sort of fit in the plans of what's coming up over the next sort of few weeks and months. Another core thing for a product manager, or another sort of key role that they have is, as Lauren said earlier, they are a voice of the user within the product team. Obviously, like, user research is a core part of the work that we do, and whilst you might have like user research colleagues within your team, it's not something unique to them. It's something the wider team should always sort of participate in. And I think especially the product manager, if you're going to be the authority on what your users are sort of saying, what their needs are, what the product should be trying to achieve for them, you're better off hearing it directly for them, sort of wherever possible. There's a multitude of tools that you can use to gather that information, and the wider team sort of supporting in doing that, sort of like looking at interviews, moderated and unmoderated testing and prototypes, using Google Analytics to look at how people are interacting with services, using simple sketches to kind of test ideas with people, but sharing those things with users, collating that feedback and helping that inform the product is just like a key way to make sure that you don't lose focus on those user needs. Really important to continue to get that feedback as well. It's it's not an upfront exercise. Iterating and sort of testing with users throughout the process is really important to avoid any surprises at the end. I quite liked this little cartoon as well, where someone's created the most usable hammer in the entire world and trying to sell it to a dentist. It's a bit extreme, but you want to make sure that the thing that you are creating is going to be useful and is going to make people's lives easier, rather than more complex, and it's actually something that they really need. The user needs as well, like, help feed into user stories, like user stories designed to represent those user needs and help sort of populate the product backlog. We've got a couple of examples here of good ways to write user stories, but they should basically always include who the user is, the overall thing that the user wants to achieve, like the overall goal or outcome for the product, and the steps to achieving that goal. And that helps you come up with like the acceptance criteria, when you're done, because the user can actually do what it is they want to do with the thing that you create. Once you've got those user stories, you can actually start populating the product backlog. So, put your user stories in there in priority order. A backlog is something that can be continually refined and reviewed in light of those user needs. It can be sort of quite a big thing in terms of like a product backlog. You don't have to work on absolutely everything at once. You should be prioritizing, and if you're working like sort of agile and working like, for example, in bi-weekly sprints, you can look through that wider backlog and prioritize which are the next things that should be focused on in that sprint and move it into that specific sprint backlog. And that would probably be like your product manager sort of leading on that with sort of specific members of the team, just to agree those things that need to go into that sprint backlog. I've got an example. This is, it was my current backlog sort of a few weeks back on what I'm sort of working on at the moment, but this was our sort of first stab at like going through identifying what those user stories were, and linking together those that kind of sort of fit within the same overall sort of feature, and as you can see, prioritizing, bringing to the top those things that we thought we wanted to test during the alpha that we're working on at the moment. These were the higher priority things, the sort of riskiest assumptions that we've made, and the things that we felt that we needed to focus on first. And in terms of that sort of prioritization, it's an ongoing thing. But there's a number of key questions that we can ask ourselves just to make sure that we are prioritizing the right thing. So, are we understanding the problem? Is solving the problem going to benefit the users? We don't want to be wasting our time, creating something that isn't actually going to solve a problem that we've identified, or is trying to solve a problem we haven't identified. Understanding, when the right time to do something is, it's not, trying not to kind of prioritize the new shiny stuff over like the really important groundwork that needs to be done first. And making sure the right people are involved in the prioritization and sort of conversations, and being able to explain that sort of more widely to stakeholders as well, and make sure that you're taking those along with you on the journey in terms of why you've made those decisions, in terms of what you're prioritizing. And we've kind of pulled together a couple of examples of stuff that we've worked on sort of previously as well, which we can kind of talk you through in terms of the roles we've played in those product teams. So Lauren, I think this is yours first, isn't it? Lauren, are you still there? Have we lost you?
Still appears to be on.
I'll tell you what, I'll go to the next one first, and then we'll see if she can get sound sorted, because this one's, I could just talk you through some of the stuff I've sort of done. So I've been working with the National Career Service for about 6 months now. And we started a discovery in January this year, where they'd identified their Find a Course tool wasn't completely meeting their user needs. So they wanted insight into the needs of citizens actually trying to find out about learning opportunities. It was sort of wider than just trying to work out why a specific tool wasn't working. We looked at more around why people would want to use that tool, what other things they were looking at, and what people's priorities were really when they were looking for a course. So we did an 8-week discovery to understand how citizens were searching for and deciding on the most appropriate learning options for them. We had a range of user research. Did a lot of stakeholder interviews, benchmarking, mapping out like the current service, and some absolutely cracking user research sort of interviews where we spoke with a variety of users who were in a variety of different sort of stages in their journey of wanting to find out about learning opportunities and what would best sort of suit them. What we delivered was a comprehensive set of user research and insights into the mindsets of users looking for courses, which was quite a good conversation starter with the career service. They have quite a good idea of the personas of the people that or the citizens that use their services, but this idea of mindsets or people having specific goals for actually looking for a learning opportunity was quite an interesting discussion to have with them, because it made them think a little bit outside the personas they already had. Made a number of recommendations for improvement based on the user outcomes, and identified a number of experiments about the next things we should test in an alpha to inform the future development and iterations of the product. And we're actually currently sort of midway through that alpha at the moment, having taken some of those experiments further forward and starting to create a prototype that we're currently testing with customers. Lauren, was that like you coming back into the meeting? Have we got you back?
I'm back. I'm really sorry. I'm hoping I've got a stable connection now. Sorry, everybody.
There you go.
Joys of working from home. Right. So yes, National Shielding Service. So obviously when COVID hit, the government had to respond to various different policies, and basically one of the responses was to be able to deliver a digital service for adults and children that were classed as clinically extremely vulnerable, to basically help them get access to priority supermarket slots, because they obviously were told to stay at home and not go shopping, and also to get support with their care from their local authority. So I was product manager on that service, and we basically quite rapidly had to develop a digital service that enabled the clinically extremely vulnerable people to register, to be able to register their needs to basically get access to supermarket slots, or get their local authority to contact them about further care support that they might need. So we had to build a front-end web form through gov.uk for the users to be able to register. We then had to store the data, and then we had to share that data downstream with supermarkets who were part of the scheme, and also I think it was about 350 local authorities across the country. So it was quite a significant service at a significant time. And you know, the policy kept changing for clinically extremely vulnerable people as well, so we really had to keep adapting the service to make sure the policy intent was clear and up to date, but also taking on board feedback from users and making sure that they could access the services that they needed at a really difficult time. So yeah, my job as part of that was to basically, you know, engage with all the different government departments, so NHS, MHCLG, local authorities as well. And yeah, just try and work together to deliver a service that really helped people in a quite an awful time. So yeah, just wanted to bring that one to life, really.
So I think that brings us to the end of the presentation. So I'll stop sharing the screen because I'm aware there's some questions in the chat, and we can kind of pick those up and something else.
So one of the questions for, oh sorry, Shiraz, do you want to facilitate?
It's all right. I think we've got some hands up, so I thought we'd just probably tackle some of the hands first, and then move on to some of the questions in the chat. So I'd like to bring Nicholas in, if that's okay.
Cool, thank you. I suppose the question is, looking at the presentation, obviously you've got your alpha, your beta, your release and go live. So what's the plan regarding then handover and BAU support, and kind of, I suppose there's a difference between ongoing upgrades, because that would be your different stages. So if we were talking about, I suppose, and this is the difference between an in-house developed solution and a third party that you've just bought. So the product owner, are they really involved in any form of the BAU support, building the models and managing it going forward? Because obviously we're good at picking solutions and then sitting with them for years on end, if not decades.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Absolutely. I mean, all services should continue to be looked after, and the product manager's job is to make sure that is still meeting the needs of users, whether that's internal or external. So throughout the different life cycle phases, the product manager's role, alongside other experts and professionals within the team, is to make sure that when it is handed over to BAU, we've got the right support model in place, so that if users are having issues with the systems or the products or services, that they can get things fixed or suggest improvements. And the concept is that we continue to iterate, right? So it's the product manager's job to look at all of those requests or issues with the system and make a decision whether things need to change. So particularly when we're talking about legacy systems, I'm working at Homes England at the moment, and there's a lot of legacy. So what we're trying to do at the moment is just figure out, what do we need to replace? What are we going to build? What are we going to buy? But that continuous improvement of a product or service, it is good to still have that product owner or product manager responsible for making decisions throughout the life cycle of the thing until it's retired. So you should always have a single person responsible for that, because they need to make sure it is still meeting user needs. So we don't get in a scenario where we've just got loads of legacy systems and then we need to do a huge transformation a few years later again. That's sort of what this model attempts to avoid, by that continuous improvement and iteration, and making sure it's still trying to achieve its purpose long term.
Can I jump in as well? Sorry, Lauren. Yeah. I think just from experience, from like sort of my previous job as well, sometimes where you have bought something in, like a third party thing, like even if it's off the shelf, the role of the product owner sort of within that organisation was really quite important, because they were, they working with the third party sort of providers, they were kind of the link in to, it meant that the product itself, stayed sort of a little bit more grounded in terms of the user needs and the business needs as well. So, that there was like almost like an extra dimension and an extra reason for having that person with that overall vision for the product there, so they could kind of make sure things were kept on track in a really, in a really sort of user focused way.
So just can I just jump in on that, Lisa, then, and just ask, how do you kind of wrestle that away from the business themselves? Because historically, a lot of the big vendors, the Northgates or NECs, as they're called now, et cetera, have user forums, which are really designed for the business to attend. so that kind of their product managers and their product owners within the third party can get that direct from the end user and kind of bypass people in the middle who might be able to give them additional support or ideas on how they could achieve things?
So if you sort of talk, so in terms of like, are you sort of saying like the wrangle between like the business, the product owner, and then sort of the third party and being that person
so
sort of in the middle?
historically, kind of, the business have their own, what they'd call, or what we used to call the business owner of a system. We'd have our internal service owner. But kind of that relationship of what you want, what change you like to see in the product, the third parties were very keen to try and make sure they did directly with the business users and actually tried to bypass IT or service owners.
Interestingly, in ours, so there was a bit of politics involved in it as well, so I'm not going to lie, but the actual product owner sat outside of IT and sat within the business, which was quite an interesting sort of way. I think, you know, there was a lot of conversations that I stayed sort of well away on in terms of sort of like the interaction sort of between the IT sort of the business and sort of that sort of third party kind of relationship. But actually having a product owner that sat outside of IT and was representing like the business needs was quite an interesting way of looking at it, because I think it kept that focus of the business and ensured that continued relationship with the third party providers and IT. They were kind of like the middle person, you know, everything kind of went into them, if that makes sense.
I think the key point there is, you know, if whether the product manager comes from IT or the business, their role is to make sure that they question why do we need this? Is it meeting a user need? Does it, you know, align with our goals and outcomes for the product or service? So whether they come from the business or from IT, I think that's down to, you know, the setups within the organization. I think you just need that person though to be able to take the requirements and be able to translate them and prioritize them and engage with the suppliers directly. So
I suppose being jealous and from not jealous is the wrong word, being cynical and being from an IT background, what I've found historically is though you tend to find those business owners don't actually necessarily understand the impact of some of those things they're discussing.
I completely agree, and I think it's a cultural shift, and you know, it's really trying to embed the profession within the organization and people understanding what the role of a product manager is, you know, and if they are coming from the business, which that I came from the business, it's completely doable. It's just making sure that there is that single voice of translating and understanding what is right for the product or service. So I think a lot of it is cultural and making sure that the organisation understands the role of the product manager and they are first port of call for any sort of requirements or changes or enhancements or fixes. And again, that product manager should be responsible, if it is a third party solution, to making sure that they're articulating that back and having that direct relationship with the supplier.
Lauren, it's Pam. Just picking up on that, as product managers, I mean, yep, you will be sort of the lead on what the users and translating that, but sort of building in like how we work in the agile delivery, it's that collaboration. You will still have a technical impact assessment to help you sort of from a non-functional inform those decisions as well. So it should never be done in isolation, I guess, just to pick up on Chris's point.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I am not an expert in technology. I'm not an expert in user research techniques. I'm not an expert in user experience design. The product manager's role is to take all of those, you know, take all of the advice from all of the professionals within the team to try and achieve the right decision for the product or service. So I guess almost in a way, I always see the product manager being the ball drops with me, but I can't make that decision alone. So it is absolutely a team effort.
Thank you for that, Chris. Azra.
Yes. I suppose following on from that, I'm just wondering, as a product owner or the manager, etc., when you're doing the discovery phase of it, I mean, and you're looking at user needs, how far constrained are you? Because if you are dealing with if you have projects already that you can't veer from, so you're doing a discovery piece, you're looking at the user needs, but actually, you're constrained by the system that you're going to have to use. I mean, is that the case, or do you just go blue sky thinking and then make a recommendation that we buy new software, etc.?
It's a bit of both. We're supposed to look at, all avenues. What's the impact of doing nothing? Can we enhance legacy systems? Can we, even if it's not legacy, can we just enhance what we have today to be able to meet those problems? Or do we need to, go a bit wider and develop something new or buy something new? Part of the discovery. Sorry.
But aren't you constrained by your financial situation then? If the project is only going to cost X amount of money, you can't. Can you go out of that remit?
You shouldn't define cost in discovery. So your budget. So basically, the discovery phase and the alpha phase is to achieve the right solution. So in terms of what that's going to cost you, that should be calculated based on the right solution, rather than being necessarily constrained. And I know that's not always practical. A lot of the role of a product manager is also understanding expectations, financial constraints, technological constraints, legal constraints. So all of that has to be sort of worked through. I think in terms of, it's not always the right thing to do to completely just start again, particularly in organisations that have a lot of legacy and have a lot of business process that needs to be transformed. But there should always be that vision of where we want to get to. So when we do discoveries, we definitely look at the sort of as is process and then map out the best to be process for the users, and then it's just a case of trying to figure out the best way of achieving that. And not all of it's achievable in one go. You might develop quite a minimum viable product, which might just be enhancing what you have today, and then you put in a bit more work to try and replace things later down the line. But yeah, I would definitely say on the budget front, you shouldn't have a budget for the solution before you've been through discovery and alpha, because that almost needs to inform some of that. So at the end of each life cycle phase, you're almost doing a check-in, and there's business cases around each of the end of those phases to make sure that you've got the right budget to deliver what you need to.
Okay.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. Sorry, Lisa, Lauren. So I'm just going to read through some of the chat comments, if that's all right. So Simon Gray says, in many respects, this role as described reminds him of what he always seen as a solutions architect. Is that, how can we relate that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely not a solutions architect. I would say
I was wondering if it's worth me expanding on that. So
yeah, that'd be great.
From the kind of point of view of having the overview of how all the bits fit together, how the various roles that are brought to the party fit together, and being able to advocate in that kind of generalist way. That was basically where the connection was being made in my head.
Yeah, I
want me to chip in here quickly?
Yeah, go on, Pam. Yeah, I do agree. I do agree with the sort of overall, definitely. Sorry, Pam, do you want to?
I mean, again, it comes back to that collaboration where the PO is really about defining what that product value is. The solutions architect sort of is the enabler of that value. It's designing the solutions, making sure that that's from a non-functional point of view, delivering what is set out from the product in terms of what the users need and that value, Simon. So they do absolutely work in collaboration, but they are quite different in terms of what they're trying to achieve. So the PO is defining, and the solutions architect is enabling, if that helps. I don't know, Laura, if you want to answer that.
That's right, Pam. Thank you. And again, the product manager ultimately, has to. And one of the things that when I first got into the role, one of the product managers that was my line manager at the time, he basically says, being a product manager, you're never going to be able to please anybody ever again, because everybody's always got conflicting needs. You know, there might be conflicting priorities in terms of what the business want and what your users want. So it's always a balancing act, and it is very hard to please everybody, but you just have to always, you know, listen to your experts, weigh up all of the different aspects, whether that's sort of policy, users, technical. Yeah, it's always a balancing act, and you do get into sort of challenging conversations sometimes when trying to explain why you can't deliver a certain thing for a certain user. So it's not all sort of sunshine and rainbows being a product manager, trust me, but it's you know, you've just got to try and trust your decisions and do it based on expertise and evidence as well. So yeah, that's another tip that I would add in there. Make sure your decisions are evidence-based and you can clearly articulate why you are doing something or why you're not going to do something.
Yeah, I'll probably agree, Lauren, but just to put you on the spot, just with a follow-up question, how important is the relationship between the PO, the voice of the customer, the dev team and stakeholders, and what hints and tips do you have for somebody who's looking to be a product manager or a product owner? Because there's a reason why I asked that question, because I find the fact that sometimes you are that, I'm going to say you're a bit of a clown, juggling all those different pieces of advice or thoughts, and then coming to a place whereby, you know what, you're trying to catch everything in two hands at the end of it without dropping any of the balls that you're trying to juggle, in that sense, kind of thing. So I just find that, you know, the PO relationship, you know, across all those different roles and all those different needs, how important is it in terms of getting to that end product, or getting through the roadmap?
Very, very, very important. I mean, you know, I always encourage working in the open, being transparent. You know, when you're kicking off a product or service, making sure you're identifying all of your key stakeholders and key users. And there's something called an agile onion. I don't know whether you've heard of that, but that helps sort of identify who you need to be engaging with regularly and who just needs to be kept up to date. But doing things like show and tells, but we know that people can't always attend show and tells, so making sure you're taking the time to build those relationships with your stakeholders and work in the open, show them what you're doing, validate what you're doing. And the same goes for user research. So your user researchers will be going out and doing the research, but, you know, product managers should be sitting in on those sessions. They should be spending time with the user researcher to make sure the priorities are right and to really make sure you're understanding the needs. And also with the development team. So we sort of set Lisa went through sort of the user stories. So this is what we need to achieve. And then it's around understanding from the technical team that how we're going to do this, what are the options, making sure that they understand the user impact and the business impact, but then you also have to understand the technical impact, because sometimes what you're thinking in terms of how we can solve that problem might not fit with the technical aspect. So again, that communication with the development teams is absolutely key, and being involved and being on stand-ups and being in all your agile ceremonies and just taking the time to really build those relationships. It is just a glorified relationship manager in a way, and then you just have to make decisions based on what everybody wants. So I would absolutely say it is really, really important to build relationships, and just be honest and work in the open. And you know, if the ways of working don't fit with all of your stakeholders, because we know that can happen, try and adapt, try and just be flexible. Don't just be an agile evangelist, like figure out other ways of communicating.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lauren. Nicholas. Sorry, Nick. I'm going to call you Nick, if that's
Either
right.
will do. Either will do. I've got two questions, I suppose, and they are slightly different from each other. I suppose the first one is, if we're talking about budget not really being looked at till post alpha, there's got to be a kind of best practice with regard to how long that process should last. Because if you spend 6 to 8 months working on your discovery and your alpha, that's a lot of resource and effort, where potentially you get to the end of it and it's either completely not the right solution or it's way too expensive from what you can deliver. So what's the kind of, there's got to be a rule of thumb, I'm guessing.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was working for the Department for Education, we had a business case for an discovery and an alpha. So the discovery was a 8-week discovery. So and then we had a pretty standard discovery team. So we had a product manager, user researcher, a delivery manager. We had a technical lead, but more on a part-time basis. And again, we had a UX and a service designer on a part-time basis. So that way you can calculate the team that you need for roughly 8 weeks. Discoveries usually run anything from 6 weeks to 12 weeks. You can do shorter discoveries if you think that's more relevant. And then again, alphas usually anything between 8 and 16 weeks. And again, for your alpha team, it's figuring out the time that you're going to need based on how much you've got to do. And then the type of roles that you need in your alpha. So you're probably going to be including a few more technical people, a few more designy people, content, because we're going to be prototyping and testing with users. Again, if it's more of a buy versus build, you might need different types of skills within the team. And again, you're probably going to be assessing the market and what products are out there that we can buy in. So you're not necessarily going to need to be spending loads of time designing. So there are some sort of rules of thumb. But then throughout your alpha phase, that's when you're sort of really looking at, okay, if we are going to build something or we're going to buy something, what's the team that we need? And, you know, that's when you really get into the details around cost. And then you'd be sort of trying to submit another business case for approval at that point. So, yeah, that's sort of how it's worked in other departments for me.
I mean, I suppose so then that process could take up to anything between, I don't know, 3 to 5 months per sort of discovery and alpha. I suppose you'd either have to have a couple of teams working. So I'm just thinking from us as a council, we have many different parts of the business and hundreds of apps, and actually if we put that much effort into all of them quite often, we'd have to either have tons of teams or not be able to deliver much. So I suppose it's just trying to understand how best that would work.
It is.
And very quickly after that, sorry, carry on.
I was just going to say, yeah, absolutely. You know, sometimes you don't need those long discoveries and alphas. Like, you know, if you've done a lot of research and it is more internally focused, or, you know, you understand the problems, you know, it is a guide. And again, you don't have to completely follow it. You have to adapt and make sure I've worked in like the national shielding service, for example. We didn't do a discovery or an alpha. We basically had to go straight into beta and just try and wing it because we had such a harsh deadline. They had to get a service for these clinically extremely vulnerable people. So, and we pushed it straight to live. So there's definitely times where you bypass some of that. And I think it's just trying to understand what's right for the council, really.
Okay.
I guess, Lauren, when you move into maybe straight into beta, you are still doing elements of discovery and alpha in that phase, because you're always going to go back to your users and test it. To make sure
it's always continuous. Yeah, you still go back and do your research, and you know you can't always solve all the problems in one go. So your roadmap should really reflect, you know, what's your minimum that you're going to deliver that's going to provide value, and then how you're going to continue to iterate on that over time and bring in more sort of outcomes and value as you go.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Was that your 2 questions, Imran?
I did have another, but I don't want to monopolise everyone's time. So.
Okay, so we're just going to go to Imran and make that the final question. So I'm just conscious of time as well then.
Okay, just out of interest, I wanted to ask with regard to the current digital program, are we in discovery stage or are we in alpha stage? Where are we with that?
So digital program, I don't, Sarita, is that the digital strategy program, Imran?
Yes. Yeah. So I know there's lots of work that's been happening with a number of people involved. So is that currently still discovery? We're still trying to find?
So I think if it's related to the digital strategy. So we're working on that last year. From April we started it and went through various different phases. So that's actually the actual strategy work is completed. So we went to Cabinet in March, and the strategy was signed off, was approved, and there was a delivery plan that supports the digital strategy work. So we're actually in delivery and working on that. Working on delivery of all the various different actions that were included in that delivery plan.
But doesn't that delivery plan involve this sort of life cycle of discovery, alpha, beta, live?
Yeah, so there are a lot of things associated with delivery of the strategy, which links to existing programs of work. So things like the customer program, which has a whole range of activities that Shiraz is leading on, and team, and they will go through that cycle, that iterative agile cycle, depending on the sort of project phase and what they're in. There's a data program that's associated with it, and exactly the same, that has a agile iterative
Okay, so it's
approach.
like we're still in discovery then in terms of those.
No, no, it's in different phases. So I
Okay.
think things will go through discovery, they'll move into alpha and beta, but I suppose there are sort of sub projects as part of those big programs of work. So the data program will have a range of deliverables, and those will be at different stages of that sort of like project life cycle.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. And I think finally, just to wrap the session up, I'd like to say thank you to Lauren and Lisa for telling us about the product manager, product owner role today. I was scribbling, writing notes, so I've learned some more today as well. But I think that really brought to life some of the roles that people are working to, and roles that are people that are working with product managers or product owners, which are roles creeping up within the council. So thank you very much for your time today, and it's a pleasure having you.
Thank you for inviting us. It's been great, and we'll share the slides as well, and happy to answer any questions after the session. Our contact details are on the slides as well. So yeah, thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, all.
Thanks, Lauren. Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you,
Thank
Lauren.
you.
Thanks, Lisa.
Bye.
Bye all.
Bye.
Thanks all.
Bye. Thanks. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.